Hi, it's Jeff Cooke again in G4 Guitar in Butler, and welcome to part 2 of Songwriting from Scales. This time we're going to talk about chord progressions. That's basically any sequence of chords that you put together within a song. Okay, let's have a look at what we can do with chord progressions. So far we've seen the chords that are constructed from the C major scale. And as you can remember from the previous video, they are C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished, and back to C again. It's worth mentioning at this stage that if we count up to the 6th note of the C major scale, we will find A minor. A minor is what we call the relative minor. Now, every major scale, without exception, has a relative minor. And you will always find this chord, or this note, at the 6th position on the scale. This is useful because it's important to remember that the A minor scale and the chords that are formed on that scale are exactly the same as the chords and the notes in the C major scale. The only difference is that the A minor scale starts from a different point. In fact, all of the chords are in the same order, but as we say, starting on a different point. If we compare the two scales here, you can see how that works. Of course, this means that we've now actually learnt two sets of chords, one for A minor and one for C major. And we don't have to learn them twice, we just have to know where one set starts and the other set starts. So as you can see, the big difference between the two scales is not the actual chords themselves. You'll find in practice that the big difference is the way that they sound. A minor scale is going to sound quite different from a major scale, and so is the minor progression compared to the major progression. Let's have a look at those now. So here is the major scale, the C major scale first. So we've got C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, B diminished and C, as we've seen before. Now, as we know, or as we've explained, the A minor scale contains exactly the same chords but in a different order. That means it's going to sound actually quite different. Here's the A minor scale going up through. A minor, B diminished, C, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor. Here's the same thing again. Now you could describe that as a darker sound or a sadder sound, or a more introspective sound. Depends on how you put these chords together. The mood of an A minor scale and an A minor chord progression is not necessarily sad, but it leans more that way than the major scale, which tends to be happier, brighter, more upbeat, depending again how you use the chords and how you put them together. So the chords and the progressions that I'm going to suggest here are not the only things that you can do. You can mix up these scales in many different ways. At the end of the day, you have to use your ears. So, how can we use these chords to make chord progressions? Are there any rules that we can follow? So let's have a look at how we number chords. Now let's have a look at the chords that we've got in the scale, and let's have a look at how they're numbered. This is important, as we'll see later, when we're actually putting together a chord progression. But for now, just let's have a look at the numbering. Normally, in numbering of chords, we actually number them in Roman numerals. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in Roman numerals, as we can see here. You'll notice that some of the numbers are in uppercase and some are in lowercase. This isn't always used, but when it is, what it basically means is whether the chord is major or minor. So if it's a major, it will be in uppercase, and if it's minor, it will be in lowercase. The same thing applies to A minor, though now, of course, the numbering is applied to different chords, so the A minor is now 1, B diminished is now 2, and so on. But of course, the actual numbering system remains the same, so the major chords are still uppercase, and the minor chords are still lowercase. Let's see how this applies to making chord progressions. So we've seen how we number the chords. So how is this used in creating a chord progression? Well, certain chords are more primary than others. In fact, we have 3 chords that are called primary chords. That will be the first chord, in the case of C major, the 4th chord, which is F in the key of C, and the 5th chord, which is G in the key of C. So we have these 3 chords which are considered to be primary chords. What that means is these are the most resolved chords. Now when we talk about resolution, we're talking about chords that feel comfortable together. For instance, if we look at the B diminished chord, now that chord is the least resolved chord in the whole scale, or at least with the chords that we've done so far. If we want to resolve it, we must go back to C. So you get that feeling of tension and then resolution. The B diminished feels a little bit on edge, as if there has to be something else following it to make it work. So as soon as we play to C, that resolves the chord. Okay? Now C, F and G are quite resolved. The other chords, numbers 2, 3, 6 and 7, are further away from resolution than those primary chords. So we can actually construct a song entirely of primary chords. For instance, those of you who have already done a blues or a shuffle or a little bit of rock and roll may have recognized the C, F and G. You may not recognize them as C, F and G, but you might recognize them as 1, 4 and 5, because you will have done something like this. Here's a C in a shuffle kind of pattern. And then we go to the 4, back to the 1, now the 5, the 4 and the 1. Okay, so we've got a little pattern there. It's a blues or a rock and roll or a shuffle, any of those things. Really relates back to the blues, but that's just 3 chords, and they are all the primary chords. So what progressions can we get from the other chords? The 2, the 3, the 6 and the 7. Let's have a look at those now. Here's our first chord progression. We're going to use the 1, the 6, the 4 and the 5, and in the key of C that is going to be the C, the A minor, the F and the G. Now bear in mind with any chord progression that you can mix up the number of beats that you play on each chord. You can mix up how long you play them for. Basically, you can have several bars of one chord if you want to. I'm going to start off with 4 beats on one chord. So that's 1 bar of each chord. So here's a C chord for 4. We're going to go C, A minor, F and G. Okay, there's a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. Okay, we want to start thinking of terms of this 1, 6, 4, 5 or 1, 4, 5 or 2, 4, 1 or whatever kind of progression that we're working on, because it doesn't matter what key we're playing in. If we're playing in the key of F or the key of G, the 1, 4 and 5 or the 1, 6, 4, 5 or whatever progression it is will have the same relationship to each other. There will be different chords, but they will sound essentially the same feel. Okay, so and now we just did 4 strums of each chord. Now obviously you can maintain that 4 beats on a chord but still mix up the rhythm, so we get okay, so that's the same 4 beats but now with a more interesting strumming pattern. These are the sort of things you want to think about, and then you could do only 2 beats on each chord. So you go so we get a faster progression, not faster in terms of the speed of the song itself, but the chords change more quickly. So lots of different ways you could do this. You can do unequal numbers of strums or rhythm patterns on each chord, although it's probably a good idea if the overall chord progression has an even number of beats in it. Otherwise we're going to run into a few problems. Okay, let's look at a different chord progression. This is a 1, 6, 2, 5 chord progression, and in the key of C it's going to be That's how that one works. Again, we can mix up the number of bars or the number of beats on each chord and play it any way we want to, and with different strumming patterns. This is entirely up to you. These are just ideas that you can begin with. Let's look at another chord progression. Now we're going to look at a 1, 2, 4, 5. Nearly got that wrong. 1, 2, 4, 5 progression, which is going to be C, D minor, F and G. That's C, D minor, and G. If you're paying close attention, you can probably start working these things out for yourself as you go. So I'm going to quickly move on to the next progression. Okay, we're going to do a 1, 2, 6, 5 progression now, which will be in the key of C, C, D minor, A minor, and G. Of course, I keep doing the same rhythm pattern, so maybe we want to do a completely different rhythm pattern just to shake things up a little bit. Yeah, there are limitless choices with rhythms and number of beats per chord, as we've said before. So let's move on to the next chord progression. C, E minor, D minor and G, which actually gives us a 1, 3, 2, 5 progression. 1, 3, 2, 5. Okay? Here's the next one. Here's a 1, 3, 6, 5. Again, a different rhythm. We might even decide to arpeggiate the chords, play each one as an arpeggio. You might have noticed so far we have started on C and in most cases ended on G. G is a good chord for resolving before you go back to the root chord, the home chord. The home chord is of course the chord that belongs to the key signature. So in the key of C, the home chord is C of course. If we went to A minor, the home chord would be A minor. And if we went to G, home chord would be G, of course. Right. But we don't have to start on C. It is quite possible to start on a different chord and still resolve to C. And resolving the progression to the home chord is the key thing here. And key is the word, because we're looking for key signatures. It is quite possible to believe that you're writing a song in the key of C and end up writing it in A minor, because as we've seen, the chords for A minor and the chords for C are exactly the same. So how do we distinguish? And it's this concept of having a home chord or a key chord or a root chord, if you like. That means we have to resolve to C, even if we don't start on that chord. And the way to find out if that works is to try and end the song on the chord which you think is the key of the song. Now, if it sounds finished when you play the C, then it's likely that you're in the key of C. If it doesn't sound finished, if it feels like there's more to say after that chord, then possibly you're in a different key. And if you're using the chords that we've suggested for C or A minor, you may be in the key of A minor. So in that case, try ending your song on A minor and see if that resolves it. It's a tricky concept, but obviously talk to your teacher or email your teacher if you've got any problems with that. Now, talking about not starting on the key chord, here's an example of that. Many of you may have heard a song by Maroon 5 called Sunday Morning. And that essentially, I'm going to simplify the chords here. The home chord is C. Yeah, okay. But we're not actually starting on the C, we're starting on a D minor. So we're going to go D minor, G, and then C. We'll resolve to C. Okay, so that would be, or with open chords. Now those of you who know the song quite well might recognise that that's not quite right. It's very similar. What we play is, instead of playing the minor and the major chords, we play seventh chords. So instead of D minor, we're going to play a D minor 7. Instead of G, we're going to play a G7. Instead of C, we're going to play a C major 7. So we get this. That resolves to C, in this case C major 7. So as we can see, we don't have to do it in the order that we're given. We don't have to start with C, but when you're beginning these things, it's probably a good idea to start with C and try and make sure you resolve to that key. A quick word about the diminished chord. In this key it's going to be B diminished. Now that's a difficult one to use, but one of the keys, as I've probably mentioned before, is that you want to resolve to the C. So you can use it next to the C. If you look at the chord progression, you will see that it is right next to the C. It's the 7th of the scale in the major scale. In the A minor chord progression, it's actually the 2nd, but again it's next to the root chord, the key chord. So it's probably easiest to play it next to the root chord if you include it in your song. Now you don't have to include this, but it's a useful chord. I tend to think of it as a transitional chord. That is, it's going from one place to another because it's so unresolved. We usually don't want to sit on that chord. We want to resolve it back to the key chord, whichever that is. In this case, C or A minor. Now don't forget, all of the chords are numbered. So if you go into a different key, once you've figured out what the chords are in that key and what their numbers are, you can do a similar chord progressions. For instance, a 2-5-1 or a 1-3-6-5, just by finding out which chords are relating to those numbers and playing those in that order. So I'm going to leave you with a chord chart showing the chords in each of the keys. Now I've left out the sharps and flat keys for the time being. We can look at those at a later date. So it's probably easier to go for the main keys beginning on the whole notes or the whole chords, the major chords. You'll see that a lot of these keys contain bar chords, or at least chords that are quite difficult to play without using bar chords. So for a beginner working out new songs, it's probably easier to start on a key like C major, or A minor, because they contain the same chords as we know, or perhaps G major or E minor, because that might contain a few difficult chords but not many. The further we go along that list of chords, the more difficult chords we'll find. But as you progress, you'll be able to do more and more of those chords. That's it for now. Next time we'll look at how to construct a melody, a simple melody on one of these chord progressions.